All right, welcome to the Operators Podcast. We've got a great episode for you today. It is brought to you, as always, by our great sponsors, Fulfill, Northbeam, Postscript, Richpanel, and Saras. Let's get after it.
New Fulfill ad alert, everybody. We have a LinkedIn post they wanted me to read and review. So I'm going to be reading this post and giving my commentary. It's a new dimension of ads. This is like 3D ad building. So shout out Fulfill come up with this concept. Jeremy says, configuring NetSuite to Shopify was a bottom 3 project of my career. It's the definition of boomer SaaS. Yep. That's everything I've heard is that NetSuite's way too expensive and doesn't really work. What started as a 6-month project didn't get launched for 18 months. Took dev teams, 3PLs. I don't know what a SL is, but yeah, I've just heard horrible things that like you get sold this like beautiful, shiny package and it ends up being hell. Like you're signing up for like, worse than a root canal. Getting inventory to sync properly with 3PL to Shopify. It's the one reason he doesn't have hair anymore. Hilarious. Adding EDI was painful. Yeah, dude, e-commerce is built on all of these horrible softwares that just that you hope work together. EDI for legacy retailers. You have like a order management system. You have a WMS. You have all that type of stuff. Fulfill just does all that for us. So it's one bill I have to pay. They connect to my 3PL. They make sure all that stuff works and the data just flows. So at the end of the day, we had all the data. In NetSuite, accounting was easier. I had mostly correct inventory access, but there was times where it broke and then they got oversold. And then he had to manually override the inventory. That's just a very old school legacy system. It's kind of like building your website on Demandware or whatever legacy system was before Shopify. So yeah, that's the old school way to do it. There's new ways to do it. And the new ways are Fulfill. But yeah, man, look, it's modern software for the modern era, right? NetSuite was a legacy standard in 1999. And I was 5 years old. Don't you think you should have software that's built at least in the past 10 years? That's what Fulfill is. So I use it. Jason uses it. If it's good enough for Jason, it's good enough for me. If it's good enough for me, hopefully it's good enough for you. Appreciate Fulfill being here the whole time. Flagship sponsor for a reason. I literally give them $100,000 a year. So it is what it is. I love them. They're the best ERP that money can buy. Because they're better than NetSuite. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for listening. Let's start the show.
I'm excited about a data conversation. I'm an analyst at heart. And so I feel like especially if you're an e-com, especially if you're really an operator, you can't even really be a good operator anymore unless you have a good grasp of your numbers. I mean, even on Shark Tank, they'll say this all the time. If you don't know your numbers, like that's the first red flag that you don't want to invest in it. And so we actually, in the early stages of the company, there were 2 or 3 years where we were just pulling everything together, basically with duct tape and Excel spreadsheets, maybe more than 2 or 3 years. And so really excited to hear, Christian, about the tool that you guys have and more generally just talk about data and how we can run our businesses better with it.
Absolutely, Mike. Looking forward to the chat, actually. And I met Matt briefly. I think our paths may have crossed very briefly back when he was at Oracle/NetSuite. Now they're the same.
It's been a solid almost 20 years, dude.
Okay, well, that's a while then.
Jason, you may not know this, but I might be the real ecom grandpa. I've been around this space for a long time.
If we're going to measure time in the game, you are. No question. If we're going to mention, if we're going to measure actual chronological age, I got you beat.
Yeah, you got me. Yeah,
I've said it before. It's like dog years. Years leading companies are like dog years. And I feel that even more intensely we've got a new startup within our kind of company that we're working on. And it's just like, I'd forgotten how like time just works really differently. And then it ends up making you feel very different in terms of your age because you get so much like experience and learning compressed into such a short period of time.
It's I think right now I woke up this morning, just for people listening, I go to bed at like grandpa hours, right? So like last night I was in bed at 8:30, and don't these on the pod just nuke my phone. I wake up and I'm like looking at the unread iMessage and I'm like, what happened? Right. And
did you see me last night? I had to be like, okay, guys, I'm signing off.
Yeah, I did. I'm going to bed.
Sean is just like, Sean rips 24/7, right? And I don't know what Mike was doing. Oh, like Mike, you're not supposed to be on your phone at 10 p.m.
That's buddy. What they say, right?
Come on. And then like it was 9:15, 9:30 Pacific.
Yeah, well, remember,
And
that's
Sean
like
just started.
11:30 my time. When you guys,
I was so surprised by this. I got up and I'm like, oh, come on, man. Like there's this whole conversation. Now, the reason I bring that up, and Krishna, then I want this to lead into you, is the whole dog years thing. Like I think a lot of people in consumer and e-com right now, it's like, this is a very, call it like a high volatility time, right?
Mhm.
Like this is like a headwind, feels like a lot of headwinds moment. And like Mike, I like to live in numbers. I like to live in spreadsheets and charts and data. So I think this is going to be a pretty timely conversation because in a world where like the rules are always changing, you really need to know your numbers. Like in my view, it's like this becomes then a game of inches. Like when headwinds show up, it's a game of inches. It's always been a game of inches, but like when you have tailwinds, revenue and growth and profit, they cover up a lot of problems, right? When you have headwinds, everything kind of shows up. It's that whole famous, it's Buffett or Charlie, where it's like the water goes out and you see who's not wearing pants.
Mhm.
So Krishna, why don't you tell everybody like who you are, what you do, what your background is, and then I know we're gonna like this conversation. So let's get at it.
Sure thing, Matt. Nice to meet all of you. I'm Krishna Poda, co-founder and CEO of a company called Saras Analytics. A little bit about history about me. I've been working in the data space in different roles for about 18 to 20 years now. My most recent stint before I joined or started Saras was as an enterprise architect at Oracle. And my passion for data sort of gotten amplified when I was there. My job at Oracle was to talk to companies and the CXOs of mid-market companies day in and day out. And the primary objective of the role was to help align data strategy with business strategy. That was the role. And a mid-market company for Oracle is any company between $1 million in revenue to $1 billion in revenue, right? I did that for about 4 years. Every day, talk to at least 5 to 6 customers with, people from different departments. One thing was abundantly clear, and I came from the enterprise world prior to that, and I was talking to a lot of mid-market companies. And one of the key learnings there was all of these mid-market companies, and especially the ones in ecom, had the same enterprise-grade data problems that an enterprise company had, with just fewer people, fewer budgets, fewer resources, right? The problems were the same, the scale was the same, the impact on the business these problems had was the same. It's just that the resources weren't there to tackle these problems. So that was sort of the genesis for Saras Analytics. Me and my co-founder started it about 8 years back. And we started off the company wanting to be a tech and consulting company from the get-go, right? And what that meant was that we stayed bootstrapped all this while, ensuring customers are happy. We build software that brings data together and shows insights. And then we have a consulting team that works with business stakeholders to take these insights, run experiments, and deliver growth or savings, as the case may be. So that's a little bit about me and Saras.
Very cool. And so you guys, we got introduced, right? Because Jason and the HexCloud team are working with you. Jason, why did you guys go out seeking to, like, what problems were you trying to solve? Let's just start there.
Yeah, let me rewind a little bit. So when I was a banker, I was actually a tech banker, and I did a lot of deals in the data warehouse and BI space. It just was an area that we focused on. So I always knew, like, inherently the value of, like, when your business is complex, the value of understanding your data, having it all in one place, and the value. I mean, I just saw companies just making so much money selling data warehouse and BI software, from the Tableaus to the Snowflakes. I showed all those guys deals over the years. And so this was like a language that I understand. I think a lot of people, they just don't get, like, why this is important. And so about 2 years ago at HexCloud, when we were sort of in the $200 million range, I just kept thinking, like, we're leaving money on the table by not understanding our data, understanding our customer, understanding our customer purchasing patterns. And as we grew and as we scaled across different sales channels and different countries, everyone talks about retention, right? Everyone, there's just so many ways that I felt that there was data out there and we were leaving money on the table by not consolidating it all in one place. And, we're big consumers of technology and e-commerce. This is why I actually think this old man became like decent at e-commerce, because I think of it as it's really a data play. It's really it's a metrics play. It's a numbers play. And so I was just like, guys, we don't know what we don't know. And we need to get all this data together in one place. And I just happened to meet a guy who was working with Krishna, or they were calling on us, and I heard that they were working with Faraday, which is a great brand, and I heard that they were working with True Classic, which was a great brand, and particularly True Classic. Like, I have a tremendous amount of respect for them from an ecom chops perspective. And I'm like, we're bigger than that. Remember, like 18 months ago, True Classic was like the darling of ecom. It's like, now, and Hexled has been the darling of ecom for a while, and then there'll be someone else soon. I don't know who, but So anyway, like we're on. We've got this huge business in Costco. We've got this huge business on Amazon. We've got this huge business in D2C, and I don't even know how many countries we're in now. And just like the simple stuff, like getting a daily sales report is actually really hard. And so the first thing I said was, you know what? I've got my guy Mateo, like every morning, building this daily sales report. So most of the times it's right. Sometimes it's wrong. I get this email every morning and I'm like, I don't know how many hours, but even if he's spending an hour and a half a day instead of pressing a button, this kid is too smart and too good to do this on his own, and it's costing me money. And then, all of the marketing metrics that we're keeping in spreadsheets everywhere, all of the KPIs, and as we talk about, maybe one day Hexlab will be a public company. We need to be able to report on all these KPIs to the street and everywhere else. And so we needed a solution to pull this all together. And the thing about data warehouse and analytics is that it's never cookie cutter. It's funny how people complain about ERPs. We have that conversation like in the Big Dog chat too, right? Like everyone's complaining about NetSuite or complaining about this other ERP. And it's like, guys, this stuff is really hard, and it's not cookie cutter. It's not off the shelf. So it has to be a combination of applying software and people to the problem. And so we've been working. Krishna, why don't you talk a little bit about what you've done for us? Because you've kind of architected it with our team. I told my team, hey, we need this. We need a data warehouse, and we need to be able to combine all of our metrics, because we've got so many SKUs across so many channels, across so many countries. And, there's no way we were managing this stuff in an Excel spreadsheet. And I mean, we can go all the way down the line from sales analytics to demand planning with this solution. So Krishna, you want to chime in?
Yeah, certainly, Jason. Matt, to you, one of your questions you asked earlier was, it's a game of inches, right? That was one of the comments that you had made earlier. So if I start there, and if I look back at the data investments that are typically made at a brand, marketing gets a big chunk of these investments, right? Marketing has acquisition targets, retention targets, and they have all the fancy tools for attribution, so on and so forth. But a lot of times, finance, operations, the inventory planning team, the supply chain teams sort of get left behind in terms of getting access to similar tools to find nuggets of information, to fine-tune their planning, fine-tune their shipping, fine-tune where they're holding inventory for a particular SKU, so on and so forth. But that's where a lot of money is lost or made, right? Especially for businesses that are heavy on inventory. If you have too much inventory in stock, and if you have to sell off at a discount, then that takes a bottom line takes a hit. So one of the things that we believe fundamentally as a business is that data is not a marketing problem or a finance problem or a supply chain or an operations problem. It's a business problem. And having different teams operating on different views of that data instead of operating on a single source of truth means that teams are directionally oriented, because people still understand what's happening. Operators are still very strong in terms of where the business is heading. But there is that 5 to 10% of operational efficiency that just gets left behind, right? And if you are $100 million business, a 10% increment is $10 million, right? That's significant. So we treat data as a business problem, and the way we go about it is we build a single source of truth, combining data from all these marketing channels, all the sales channels, marketplaces, 3PLs for inventory, fees from Amazon, for example. There might be a bunch of spreadsheets floating around. Businesses that are big on affiliates might be planning in spreadsheets, for instance. SKU management tends to be in spreadsheets in a lot of places where they don't have ERPs. We pull all of this data, put it into a data warehouse, and then we give dashboards and analytics for all of the different departments. So so in the case of HexClad, they were in 9 different marketplaces within Amazon. They are selling on Shopify. They have Costco and these other channels as well. So they had at least 10 to 15 sales channels. They had 10 to 15 marketing channels where spend was happening day in and day out, right? So we consolidated all of that. And now Jason has near real-time visibility into how much is being spent, what's the revenue, what's the margin, because we have cost data that we are pulling from the ERP and loading that into the warehouse as well. So now, if a marketer is looking at what is the return on ad spend I'm driving, how much is my LTV, they can also actually start looking at how much margin are we driving, how much net cash position we are driving. And I'm of the opinion that that's going to help the marketer bring in, or focus on bringing in customers who are high value, high margin, with high margin products, so that the net cash position of the company gets better, and then the whole cycle improves overall. So where we are at with Jason is sales, marketing, and margin and inventory reporting is done. So now,
Mike, how do you guys do this? Like what Krishna is talking about right now, because like you are wildly multi-channel, omni-channel. Are you still heavy spreadsheet heavy? Because you are such an analyst. Like it's funny when you describe yourself as an analyst at heart. I'm like, oh yeah, that's so true. Like everything starts with models, right? So like, how do you run your company with all this stuff?
So one of the things that I think is worth saying to just kind of frame this is that as the complexity of your business grows, your ability to really stay on top of what's going on with the data becomes exponentially harder. And so adding channels, adding markets, these things really just take up the complexity in order of magnitude. And that's kind of what Krishna's getting at. If you're just doing we just sell on the Amazon marketplace in the US, for example. It's like you probably don't need a software. You just need a process. Although even with Trevi, that's our main channel, and we're still using a software to kind of keep on top of the numbers. But I don't think you have to at that point. As you start to add more pieces, it really becomes a necessity that you've got something that's helping you track all of it. And observationally, I'll tell a funny story about our company. We historically have had 2 factions in Simple Modern, the top liners and the bottom liners. And the joke is that, the top liners are they're all growth, expansion, distribution, sales. And the bottom liners are like, yeah, but profit is what pays the bills. Profit's what matters. And the observation I've made about myself is that when I don't have really good reporting, it's easy to just gravitate towards being a top liner, because tracking revenue across your channels is really the easiest thing to do. It is significantly more difficult to track your expenses and your margins across all of your channels. And what ends up happening if you don't have some kind of system or software or something that you're doing to be able to track what's going on in all your channels is that you just gravitate towards looking at the revenue. And then you look up one day and your CFO is like, hey, we are losing money in, the UK. And you're like, how's that even possible? And it's because you've kind of lost track of your advertising spend as a percentage of sales or whatever. When you're small, it's easy because hey, here's the 3 or 4 KPIs I have to keep my eyes on. As you get bigger, there's 100 KPIs. And it's not really feasible. So the way that we approached it, we're actually talking to Saras right now. The way we approached it, we hired somebody to own data, and they built an internal data warehouse And we've used Power BI for some of our stuff. Some of the challenges that you run into is that really to pull all this data requires accessing the APIs of a whole bunch of different organizations, some of which won't even give you the data. Like Walmart, the big retailers, often they will charge you for some to be able to access some of their data and the APIs. So you've got to, and the APIs will change all the time. So like you can build something and then Amazon will change a naming convention and all of a sudden all your numbers break. There's another advantage of having a software layer where they're really tracking and keeping all of the integrations working well. But it's been a process. Interestingly, we're in year 10 and I kid you not, I think it was year 8 before I started to feel like I got really good comprehensive analytics about our business. And even still, I feel like there's a lot of data that we could be capturing that we're not. We're primarily focused on financial data. As one example of what I think is coming is I think that with the possibilities with AI, you're going to be able to leverage a lot more data to make decisions. And one of the reasons why I think that that's true is that right now, the way it kind of works is if you have a good system to kind of organize your data, then if you're like, I am looking for this thing, I can go and find that point of truth. I want to know what margins are in the UK. Okay, I can go find that now. The way that I think these systems will work in the future, and I'm excited about this progression, is that instead I can sit down at my computer and say, hey, what number should I be looking at? And it's able to say, some systems able to say, hey, what margins have dipped by, 30 basis points, 300 basis points in the UK over the last 10 days. You should check out why. And so like the difference between me saying, okay, I know what needle I need in the haystack, I'm going to go get it. We're at the stage where that's, I think, more doable, even with a complex business. I think the next progression, which is really exciting, is systems that tell you, hey, here is exactly where you should be looking. Not only do I have the data, but here's exactly where you should be looking. And that'll lead to much better decision making.
If you send SMS messages, I don't actually know why you're not using Postscript. My view is simple. I just don't think you should be gambling with SMS. Every single message that you sent out should be the best message that you can send out. It's a high ROI channel, so you should take the best shot you can possibly take. There's a reason why we're all with Postscript. They help us take the best quality shots. I have used 4 different SMS platforms over the years, and it feels like I'm just not gambling with Postscript. They are always leading edge in the latest features. They're even going to be early on this AI stuff. I honestly don't have a good reason why you shouldn't at least consider them for your SMS marketing. Like Postscript is just a great platform. Take a look.
Krishna, I don't know if you have a strong opinion on this, but I guess, Mike, like one thing that I just took away from this is adding markets, adding revenue capture channels. So like because I think like in D2C land, we focus way too much on where we're spending money and not enough where we're capturing. Like channels is really about like, where am I selling things? So like stores, owned, like that kind of stuff. Krishna, where...
Can I make a point about that real quick, Matt? This is a more general operator point. If you have not read it before, one thing that everybody listening to this, you should stop right now and go into Google and search Netflix Culture Doc. Yes. And it's a famous PowerPoint presentation, basically slide deck that they put together about how they view culture. But there's a point here that I think is really relevant and salient, which is that as you add complexity to your business, the complexity as you add channels, as you add people, as you add products, as you add countries, your complexity can get away from you. It can scale not linearly, but almost exponentially. And that's really dangerous for organizations. And I think one of the biggest ways you can get in trouble with a successful business is by taking on a bunch of things because you're like, oh, this means more revenue, this means more expansion, this means more, more brand growth, without understanding the way that it's going to impact the complexity of your business. So a really simple way of thinking about this is there are definitely activities that I've greenlighted that we have done where the complexity it added to the business and the overhead it added to the business made it not worth doing. But it's really, really, really difficult to see that because you don't, it's very difficult to allocate overhead and what people do and complexity to tasks. And so that's just an angle to think about, is that whenever you're adding anything, you really have to balance what it's bringing in the doors, what it's adding to the organization with the amount of complexity it's adding, because complexity is a major drag on growing a business.
That's a great point. That's kind of, yes, said very well, where I was going with this. But Krishna, can you give us you see a lot of companies, right? The downside to the three of us right here is we kind of only see ours. When should somebody start thinking about getting a wrangle on all of this, I guess, data, like complexity, right? Like where does this start to become valuable for a company? Because Mike already said, if you're a single channel seller, you're a .com D2C, you heavy spend on Meta, or you're an Amazon focused seller, your numbers really aren't that complicated. And the dimensions that across the business, there's not that many, right? So when have you seen this to start to become a conversation? Is it size of revenue, number of markets, SKUs? How do you evaluate this, and how should brand operators think about it?
Yeah, great question, Matt. So the way I think about it is, any business that's making less than 10 million in revenue, to some extent, is finding their product market fit, right? If I were to use a SaaS terminology, there is a lot of hustle to, get to product market fit, get to sustainability, so on and so forth. They still need some sort of a data tool to, spend their time in useful endeavors than downloading into spreadsheets and massaging all of that data. But a turnkey solution might be sufficient, might get them 70, 80% there, and they just spend 20% of the time tweaking it. But as businesses go past the $10 million in revenue, they are expanding into multiple channels. They are introducing more SKUs, right? They are doing some pricing experiments. And that's where the infrastructure should be in place. But the infrastructure should give them enough leverage to be able to customize it to fit their specific business requirements. The way I think about it, Matt, is a business starts on Shopify at $0 in revenue. You're still on Shopify at 200, 300 million in revenue, right? Shopify is enabling you to scale in that channel. Amazon is enabling you to scale in that channel while giving you, additional benefits along the way or additional features along the way. Your data infrastructure can also scale along with you if you do it right from the get-go. Otherwise, what ends up happening is marketing will end up with a set of tools, operations and finance will end up in a bunch of spreadsheets. And if a business is then looking for, let's say, a Series A or a seed round, the investment cycles will just take forever because producing accurate customer lifetime metrics and customer metrics is just inaccurate. So $10 million is the line where I draw, but that could be 20. It really depends on who's running the business, who are the operators, how data savvy are they. The most data savvy ones we have seen start as early as 10 or even 5 in some
Krishna,
cases.
you just made a point that made me think about something. So there's a 10 million threshold, which is a good one. But I want to say two things about that. Number one, also another threshold is if you have more than one channel, right? But for the 10 million or $20 million company, one thing that I wish we would have done very early on was get all you sort of hinted that you get it all in place early and let it scale. So it's really, we talked about knowing your numbers in general. This is something that we always talk about, and you see a lot of startups or young companies that they just don't pay attention to those good housekeeping type of things early on in the business. So I think you do have a solution, but I'm not exactly sure because we're much bigger. But what would you propose to that $10 or $20 million company that needs, because that's a lot of our listener base. What is the process for them, and what do they do? Because I think you have a more off the shelf solution to start with, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's right. So for smaller businesses, we have an off-the-shelf solution that gets them started within a couple of days. But then as the business grows and their requirements become custom, they're adding more channels, so on and so forth. We can definitely go back in there and customize it to fit their needs. And that's where our agency analysts and data engineers can come in and, pick up a a quick customization project within a sprint and deliver for customers.
So how does that work? Like, how does that off the shelf solution work, and what does it do?
It's a SaaS software, so customers can come into the site, log in, sign up for it, connect their sales channels, marketing channels, etc. And by the end of the day, they'll have customer reporting, various cohorts. They'll have consolidated sales, consolidated marketing reporting. And if they want to get into margins and operational efficiency, etc., those tend to be a lot more complex for a turnkey setup. And that's where we can come in and help with the rest of the pieces, right?
So the first things that plug in is Shopify, right?
Yeah. Shopify, Amazon, Walmart. Now TikTok Shop is all the rage, right?
So you can plug all that stuff in very quickly.
Yeah. It just, the onboarding probably takes maybe an hour or two if they have the credentials. And that's all we need. And within a few hours, their dashboard should be up.
I just want to clarify for everybody listening, because this is one of the big advantages of working with a software provider in this, is that all of these, TikTok Shop, Meta, Amazon, they all have APIs. And if you're not technical, you don't exactly understand what the API is. It's basically a way to call in and to get the information that's in the database. And the interacting with these APIs, every API has kind of like, there's some general standards, but everybody runs theirs their own way, and has their own little nuances. And you've got to kind of figure out, okay, even once I get connected to the API, what are the things I want to get from it? How often can I ask it for things? Like some APIs, if you talk to it too often and you ask for information too often, it puts you in timeout, or it punishes you because you're taxing the system. And as I mentioned earlier, people will change their APIs. Like some engineer will say, hey, what we called, today underscore sales now is today underscore net sales. And so if your API is calling for today underscore sales, you get nothing. The reason why this matters is that when you have a software provider, this is a big part of what they do, is managing these APIs and understanding these APIs. If you do it individually, you have to have somebody on your team that's keeping up with all this stuff. And so as an example, like if TikTok Shops has some kind of change to their API or makes some new data available, if you're doing it yourself, you may not know about that for months or until something breaks. If somebody like Saras is doing your analytics for you, they're going to know about it almost immediately. And then you're going to get the benefit of the fact that they're kind of looking over and seeing everything. I think the other big advantage is that sometimes the software providers will know about even data that you can get that you're not aware of. So one thing that's super interesting is that with some providers, there are pieces of data that you can't get to from a front end. Like they haven't built a report for that. But if you have API access, there's ways to piece together. Perfect example of this in the marketplace right now with our new company, Trevi. Subscriptions are a part of what's important to grow that. And Amazon's front end, or I guess back end reporting, the ones that you can access through Seller Central on subscriptions, is horrendously bad. Like you can't tell what's going on basically at all. And in order to get a real idea of what's going on, you really have to be pulling from the API and putting things together. And so sometimes it really is like, hey, there's an edge that can be had by using API data because you literally can't even access it from the front end. So these are some of the examples of ways that you benefit. And I think we've kind of said, hey, what's the threshold? And Jason, I liked what you said. A principle is the earlier you start on developing an infrastructure that's befitting a bigger company, the easier it is to grow into that. But if you start too early, then you build all this infrastructure for a company that didn't have product market fit. And that doesn't make any sense either. NetSuite, Fulfill, like these ERPs are exactly the same way. Like implementing an ERP when you're at 100 million in revenue, like we did, sucks really bad. And you kind of wish that you'd started at 10 million in revenue, but it's also like nobody's thinking about that at 10 million in revenue because you typically don't do the ERP until you've got a gun to your head. So anyway, these are some of the trade-offs that exist.
Is your customer service team drowning in support tickets? That was us before switching to Richpanel. What if your team could focus on conversations that truly needed a human touch? Well, Richpanel is an AI-first help desk built for e-commerce. We've been with them for a while, and we've accomplished 3 things already. 1, we've immediately cut our customer service costs by 50%. That's more features, better support, and instant impact on our top and bottom line. Boom! Savings. The automations didn't compromise customer satisfaction. In fact, we're at an all-time high with a 92% customer satisfaction score. Our customers are happier, our agents are happier, and I'm happier because of the savings. I'm on track to save over $500,000 in CX hiring costs thanks to their AI. Now I can tell Connor to take that money and put it right into Meta. Join the 2,000 7, 8, and 9-figure brands that have switched to Richpanel. Save money, save time, and improve the quality of your customer support. The Richpanel team's amazing. They're going to be on Slack with you. They're there to help build custom features to make your life easier. If you want to slash your customer support expenses by 30% and reduce tickets by 30%, go to richpanel.com/demo. richpanel.com/demo. Demo. For the final time, it's richpanel.com/demo. Tell them the operator sent you. Tell them you've never heard of Cody or Jones Road Beauty, that they did not send you. It was the operators. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
This whole like question of trade-offs with tech, I'm gonna be like a tech defender right now because I used to be a tech banker and help SaaS companies raise money and get sold. What people don't realize is like you look at the cost of these solutions and you're like, oh wow, that it sounds like a lot of money. You know, this is a cost center. But this is not a cost center. This is a profit center, guys. Like this is a profit center. You spend $100K or $200K or $300K on this, and you should be looking at like a 2 to 5x return on that money. You know, probably more like 5x
More like
because
5x, yeah.
it's just going to help you make better decisions. And I think, of course, like capital is scarce in our world, and you have to make choices. But I just think people are often really short-sighted in how they think about investing. I remember
because people
when I
can't see
came
the
here,
counterfactuals, Jason. Like if you having good reporting helps you to catch that a SKU is mispriced and is $10 too low in a market,
I have
right?
example
like-
from last week, Mike.
Yeah.
Cut you off, but I have a very recent example from last week where one of our customers were customer was ordering 2 or 3 units of pieces of clothing. They were actually receiving 3 packages from 3 different warehouses. Each shipment costed them $20. So all of those 3 pieces was $200. They were paying $60 in shipping just for that, right? And there were at least a few thousand orders that were getting delivered from different warehouses where the entire margin in that order has been fully eroded, right? If they fix that problem, staff put the right inventory in the right warehouse and they consolidate it, there is at least a $500,000 savings just from putting the right SKU in the right warehouse and consolidate those shipping. And this was just as recent as last week, right?
It is amazing. I mean, I have horror stories like that with like shipping to Hawaii, for example, where like nobody was thinking about the shipping economics of Hawaii. And then we realized we were paying $100 a shipment to ship, a $20 water bottle to Hawaii. There's lots of examples of this. And there's kind of this interesting tension, which is you want to build a business. Like when you're in the early stages of building a business, it's like every sale, you're like, let's go. We've got a sale. I know all my customers' names. I've stalked them on Google Maps, because there's not a lot to, you dream, you aspire to build a business that's so big that you don't, you don't pay attention to that stuff anymore. And you kind of like can't pay attention to all the orders and stuff that are pinging around. But that's also the point where you lose track of the granularity. And if you don't have a system to track it, I mean, I could probably, off the top of my head, I could probably name 5 or 10 times that I have been made aware of an issue that cost us tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars that was so stupid. And if you had the right number in front of you, you would have caught so quickly, but we just didn't. We just weren't looking at the right number, or we hadn't pulled it in. And so like, I actually think that's kind of one of the rites of passage of building a scaled business, is going through the pain of just losing money on stupid things because you're not able to watch everything.
We've been talking a lot about the marketing metrics, which is really cool, which we need to make better decisions. But like this cost side that, we just talked about, is so huge. Like, we really need to double click on this for a minute, because I remember, in like when the holidays come around and we're all going crazy. Like, I mean, we have so many horror stories of hundreds of thousands of dollars to even seven figures of operational mistakes in fulfillment. Like, I don't know whether it was 2022 or 2023, but we're moving stuff between our own warehouse and our 3PLs, and just like not having control and not having the information at our fingertips to see this stuff. Like, I mean, it cost us at least 500 grand, at least $1 million, for whether it was 22 or 23, by just not having the right systems in place. And it's like, that's why investing in the right technology, and that's why, like, I love our sponsors, because they are all like solving these problems that actually help us make money, help our people make money. It's just like, it's so short-sighted and I know, like, you can't touch it and feel it. You don't like, it's hard to prepare for it. It's hard to, like, think, be forward thinking about, oh, this problem can happen one day. You don't know till after it happened, and you're like, shit, I just burnt $500,000. Right?
Yeah. Oh, and hey, this quarter, I thought we made $500,000 in EBITDA, and we made zero because of a mistake somebody made. I mean, this is real. Like, we've been through that this can happen. And I think your point, Jason, is that especially during periods where it is not easy on the revenue side, and it is not. I mean, it's a hard period revenue wise. Like, I mentioned this in the chat last night. I think the latest industry data on my vertical, which is insulated drinkware, which has been an absolute hero in the home houseware space, the data says that over the last 3 months it's shrunk. First time it's ever happened. Like, we are running into the wind. Almost everybody is running directly into the wind at this point. And so costs matter a lot. Part of being an excellent operator is that you have a great pulse on your costs, that your costs are what you expect them to be, and you're tracking that. And it's worth making the point, like you said, Jason, it's easy to dunk on software companies, I think, when you're an operator, because you feel like, oh, well, I'm in the trenches, I'm doing the hard work, and these tech guys. But the reality is that this stuff just does not make sense to do internally for the vast majority of companies. And what you're able to do with great software, I think all of the ones, Saras and all the other ones that we're willing to talk about on the show, pass this test. Great software allows you to have the capabilities of a much bigger company much earlier. So you can have the capabilities of 1,000-person company from a data perspective when you're a 10-person company. And that's a competitive advantage. That's the competitive advantage of using software well. And so, is some software overpriced? Sure. Can software get misused? Like, you'll see these little bitty companies that have these massive tech stacks, and you're like, you're probably not doing it right, bro. But there's other places where it really is a competitive advantage, and it really helps you to stay on top of your costs. And, like, it doesn't matter how much revenue you make if you can't make the margins you expect to make off of it. And if I can give
you an exact example.
Yeah,
like,
I'd love to hear.
Here's the power of just intelligence, right? Data intelligence. So I think when we were around 15 million in revenue, we opened a 3PL in the US. So, like, we're a Canadian-based company. We were shipping out of Canada. We're like, let's open a 3PL in the US. That market's really growing fast. Like, we're going to double the business this year. Let's just do it. So we open up the 3PL. The way that we had set everything up, and again, this goes, number one, this speaks to complexity. Number two, it's like, if you cannot see these things, they bite you. So we started to notice really quickly, because I have two people on staff that are like, it's just funny. I have two sisters. They're like data scientists. They're hardcore data nerds, because I come out of this world, so I had them early. We started to notice that we had a disproportionate amount of split shipments. So, like, one part of their order was coming from Canada, one part was coming from the US. This was at that size. So, like, from 15 going to 30, I think if we didn't catch that, I remember somebody saying like it would have cost us $600,000 in 12 months. Like, and it's such an innocuous thing, right? It's like, oh, it's an order that had 2 items on it. And just because I was split shipping it at our volume, it was that big of a problem. That was like, if we hadn't caught it, huge freaking issue.
Yeah.
And that's like one little thing. I have others. That's one little one.
Yeah. So the way I look at this is a 3-axis problem, actually data. There is speed on one axis, there is completeness on the other axis, and there is accuracy of data on the other axis. So when businesses are small, they're just looking for speed, right? I'm a $10 million business. I just need my analytics quick. I'm okay to sacrifice on accuracy. I am more than certain that I am sacrificing on completeness because I'm not necessarily looking at the things, Matt, that you just spoke about from an operations and shipping standpoint, right? Because there are so many 3PLs. It's really hard to integrate 3PL data into a data warehouse for operational reporting. So they lean with speed. As businesses grow, they invest more for completeness of data, but more often than not, or accuracy of data or completeness of data. But all of those generally are still marketing focused. But the moment you bring completeness into the mix and you bring in your operation stuff, there's just a whole another layer of unlock that's available for brands. And we discussed 3 scenarios here. I just have one other shipping story to tell you. We had helped a customer do a pricing experiment recently, last quarter, where we did an A/B test, increased the free shipping threshold from 100 to 150. The conversion rates did not drop. So they moved the free shipping threshold up from 100 to 150 for all orders after that test. That's $2 million in savings on shipping right away. Right now, to conduct that test, it was easy for us to do it because the infrastructure was there. We could quickly validate whether the test was successful or not successful, and then scale it out and monitor whether it continues to be successful or not. And if I am scavenging for information from all of these different systems because an integrated single source of truth is not there, then the pace at which these experiments could run significantly drop. Right. So that's another recent example that we ran into.
So running an e-commerce business at scale isn't just about great products and marketing. It's about precision. And when you're operating at a high level, 99.9% accuracy stops being nice to have and becomes non-negotiable. That's why I'm excited to talk about our experience working with Saras Analytics. They've given us real visibility into the numbers that matter. Things like product level COGS, supply chain costs, inventory optimization, all of our marketing metrics. That's just the start. We're estimating 2 to 5% efficiency boost across the board, improving customer retention, making our marketing dollars work harder, and ensuring we're operating smarter as we're getting bigger. These aren't just minor wins. They compound over time to make a huge difference in profitability. But what I really love, the cultural shift this brings. When teams have clarity on the data, collaboration improves. Finance, marketing, and operations aren't just working in silos anymore. They're making decisions together with the same source of truth. It's not just about insights. It's about execution. I talk about this all the time, execution. So if you're scaling your e-com brand and need that kind of accuracy and efficiency, you need to talk to Saras Analytics. It's been a game changer for us.
So I just have one, as operators and head of companies, I'm always curious how your Monday morning meetings run in terms of talking to your teams or setting KPIs or OKRs for your teams, right? So I'm just curious. I want to pick your brain on that.
I don't do them on Monday mornings. That's the
I
number
want
one
to know
rule.
this too. I need help.
Number one rule: don't do team meetings on Monday morning.
What if it's not Monday? Okay, well,
Tuesdays.
You know what? The
Do
Monday
Tuesday morning.
meeting thing is really prevalent in like sales and trading and in finance and stuff like that. We do meetings. We do a C-suite meeting on Tuesdays. It used to be Mondays, but I fought like hell to change it to Tuesdays. And then on Wednesdays, We have a senior leadership meeting 3 times a month, and we have an all hands company meeting like the fourth Wednesday. So I don't know how productive it is, to be honest, but you do have to share information somehow. We're constantly looking at this. We added like 100 people last year. I mean, it's nuts. We literally doubled the size of the company headcount last year. So we're still really figuring it out. I was just looking at my comms lately. I wanted to post a screenshot of my iPhone with the number of emails and texts that I just like literally can't read anymore. I have like really good friends who I haven't gotten back to in so long. It's really hard. Matt, talk to us, Matt.
So, okay, and I know, Mike, you're going to have some thoughts on this too. I think this actually is Christian, it's actually a great question, because like equipping a very small team with a lot of data might actually not be as valuable as a larger team that is like, you start to need them all to have more information, right? So like one of the benefits you have when you're a small team is owner operators are in a lot of things and we're seeing everything. So it's easy for us to kind of be traffic controllers on like all things in the company, right? And we wind up with like inherent knowledge on the business. We call that context. So we actually, like, to your speed comment, you don't need really a lot of sophistication, because like one of the strengths of an entrepreneur is just straight up pattern matching and like working with lots of information, and like they can make decisions really quickly. But what happens when you start to add people is now you have a two-dimensional issue. You have lack of good information, right, across the company, because it used to be in like a person or a few people's heads. And you have a lack of systems or lack of process for how to disseminate and share information. So like, how do you actually make it really effective? How do you build like an effective, or like Jason, like a productive team? This is where actually the meeting rhythm matters. Like it's at that point in a company's journey where like that stuff starts to matter. So I'm a fan of the weekly, like we run on a version of Traction, like our own version of EOS Traction. I don't like creating operating systems. Sort of like I don't like building a lot of software if we can buy it. I don't like building custom business operating systems when there's like ones out there that they sort of work, right? So like I'm a fan, adopt something that somebody else has put a lot of work into. We run on Traction. There are others. So we kind of follow a weekly L10. We do a daily, like a stand-up now every Wednesday with the whole company. It's like 15, 20 minutes. Right? Everybody has to join. I know Sean does this, I actually think daily or a few times a week. He does like a whole team stand up. We do a monthly all hands. Then we do quarterly planning. That's it. That's a big thing. And then we've talked about the one-on-one thing, but like from a team perspective, I like the weekly, or even when you're smaller, we used to do daily stand-ups every morning for 15 minutes. And that was strictly a like, tell us what you're working on, tell us where you're blocked. And if you need some help on something, that's it, right? Everybody can just rattle it off. And it creates such a huge amount of like osmosis in the business. Like all that inherent knowledge starts to spread around. So I think that's how I look at it. Like I've scaled up these rhythms all the way up into the hundreds of employees before. So like, I know it works. But the data piece is like, I'm happy we're having this conversation. That is like a very, very big part of it. Mike, how do you guys do this at your company? Like, what do your internal rhythms look like?
Yeah. Well, one just general kind of point I want to make as somebody who loves numbers is that the dangerous things, the thing about numbers from my experience is that a lot of data, you can spend a lot of time looking at it and it's functionally just navel gazing. Like you can't do anything with it. It's like, oh, this is super interesting that, 15% of UK customers return within a week, but only 11% in the US. And it's like, well, that's great if you can do something with that data to help, drive up US customers to 15%. But sometimes it's like, well, no, that's great. That random esoteric fact about the world, but you can't do anything with it. It's not actionable. And so I think the challenge and what effective leadership looks like here is being able to understand how to find in the data the things that you can actually do something about that impact your business and make your business more effective. And we're relentlessly looking for that. Just as a general, even zoom out even more. The world is so awash with information right now. Like our access, there's something like in a day, there's more information that gets published than the entire, history of the world up until 1900 or something like that. Or like that's every hour or something, some kind of crazy thing like that. So the alpha today is not having data or loving data. The alpha today is understanding what data to look at, and that you could spend all day looking at data and not get any better at running your business. You have to be able to understand what is the signal and what is the noise. And I'm going to look at the things that I can impact and that I can deploy in the business. And that's what we spend a lot of our time when it comes to this. This is, I think, one of the more effective ways you can do that is that when you're doing your planning for the year, like when we did our annual OKRs, there's a lot of quantitative stuff, and then we have dashboards, and we're keeping that in front of people. And those are the numbers that we're really looking at, because those numbers tie directly to company objectives. But we're still figuring it out, and I think we're evolving with the landscape is what I would say. But and some of this is just judgment. Some of like the understanding of like how do I figure out what numbers to look at? I do think this is one of the things you get better at as an experienced operator, is that you have the ability to not get distracted by all the noise and to be able to say that's the number that we're going to look at. There's a really good I think it might be in the Musk biography, but the idea that you kind of create a God metric for your business or for an initiative that really helps you to kind of crystallize and understand, like, how are we doing? Like for SpaceX, I think it's dollars per kilogram of cargo or something. It's something like that, where that's their metric. We are going to drive that metric down over time, because we know that every incremental gain we make in making it less expensive to move stuff to space, that directly translates to success of the company. And this is where the executive thought is. The executive thought is being able to think about what is that metric, or that combination of metrics that allows you to kind of put on the X-ray glasses and peer through things and understand how to lead your team better.
We worked with a very, very popular subscription brand, and when they were at 25 million in revenue, their CEO came and had very few subscribers at that point in time. Their CEO came in and said, we're going to try and get to $1 million subscribers in the next 6 years or 5 years. That was the North Star metric, Mike. I think that's the one that you're talking about.
Yep.
They got damn close to it. Those 5 years of rapid growth for the subscription brand was some of the fastest accelerating, pace of growth that I have seen, and we were their data team for an extended period of time. What that metric did for every team is that it oriented all of their efforts to achieving those metrics. So the acquisition team was focused on growing their numbers. The retention team was focused on keeping the subscriber as a subscriber. The shipping team had their own metrics for customer happiness, where they were hawkishly tracking how long is shipping taking. If a customer is churning, did delayed shipping play a role in it? They were looking at churn reasons to understand why people are churning, and they made adjustments. So that one metric, what that did is oriented the teams toward that unified goal. And every team then started to look at, okay, how am I going to contribute in my own little way to ensuring that those numbers are met? So
Can I give you guys some thoughts on this too? Like, so I've got, having just been around this space a long time, and I think this is true with all business, maybe not just like e-com, D2C consumer, but there are some good rules, I think, for numbers, metrics, data, leadership, decision, like good judgment, all that stuff. So the first is one leading, like a linchpin goal, let's call it that. That's great. I think most companies overcomplicate what they measure, largely because most numbers, as Mike, you pointed out, they're useless. The general rule is there's probably seven.
Well, and it's not, I just want to make a clarification. It's not that they're useless. It's that they're downstream.
Yes.
And so, it's the cause and, it's like the cause and effect or the correlation causation. The only numbers that help you are causal numbers, because that means if I change that number, then that will cause other things to happen. There's a lot of times where teams chase around on numbers that are downstream, and they're like, why can't we move it? And it's like, because that's not the cause. Cause is something else.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, so there's usually only 7 to 10 metrics that matter. That those are the things that you should be tracking. The reason that you want to track a small number of metrics, one of the benefits of it is there can be tracked on a weekly basis and help you make good decisions, right? Because there's a big difference between lagging metrics and leading indicator metrics, right? So that whole like causal thing, like you want to find the numbers in your business that like as a leader, just looking at those numbers lets you know how the business is doing. It should give you a good and complete picture of like, this is the health of my company in the last 7 days. Mm-hmm. And that when your leadership team looks at this, so this goes back to your weekly meeting rhythm thing.
Yep.
Then when you're looking at it with your leadership team, you're looking at these core numbers. You can make decisions as a team around these causal numbers, right? This is why when I look at a week and I'm like, sales is a nice number to look at, but it's not really telling me much about what we need to do next, right? There's a bunch of other things that lead into the output, which is revenue or profit. So I think operators dramatically overcomplicate measurement. And I think, Krishna, that's something that you guys help with is like, how do we get to like the root? What are the things that actually matter? And sometimes this is per team. I'm talking about it purely from like the CEO, founder, operator. Like I only care about 7 to 10 numbers because that allows me to go talk to my C-suite about very specific things, right? And then every team might have their own 5 to 10, 7 numbers, whatever they are. But this, I think, is like a framework for operators. Like this is kind of what you want to aim for.
Yep.
Is don't think of yourself like freaking Neo in the Matrix. Like you don't need 1,000 numbers on a screen to be doing a good job. You're probably doing yourself a disservice if you do that.
Yep, we could take the 80-20 principle and find those few things that will really move the needle, make that an objective for a quarter. Maybe an objective for a quarter is I want to reduce my overall expenses on shipping by 5%, right? Or I want to increase my customer retention by X% over the next 2 quarters, right? And what that would do is align the teams on a goal, right? The retention team, the acquisition team, the supply chain team on a goal for retention. And each team may have their own individual metrics that they care about, but all perfectly oriented towards achieving the final outcome, right? So that's one way we've seen teams be quite successful is, yes, there's so many things that you can track day in and day out. There's only so many that you can really move the needle on. And if that definition comes from the executive team and the teams are aligned, some really positive things can happen in the business.
What's up, guys? Sean from Ridge here. I'm here to talk about the value an MTA solution can provide to brands. So we've been on Northbeam since day one. We were the first customer. We were there when they were building the platform, and they built it for the needs of a high growth meta-dependent brand. Okay, that's what Ridge was back then in 2017. It's what Ridge is now. And they've been building a tool for meta-dependent brands the entire time. So what are they trying to solve? What is the problem here? Well, first-party data is more and more critical. End-to-end first-party analytics and multi-touch attribution is the only way to guarantee the right spend allocation. Now, ad platforms max out at 30 days of attribution. Now, that works for some brands, but most brands it doesn't. The power to understand a customer journey, no matter how long it started, has a huge impact, especially for higher AOV products. As we get into luggage, as we get into rings, we just need to understand what's making these customers come and make a purchase with us. Using a tool like Northbeam, an MTA tool, diminishes the overcrediting of things like retargeting and branded search. We all want to know where that customer actually learned about us and where it started. So here's just some data from Northbeam. Northbeam customers do better, period. They've measured over $3.8 billion in spend and $26 billion in revenue. Okay. Now, they measure brands pre and post launch, and post launching on Northbeam, they see a 5.5% revenue improvement, They see 7% increase in new customer transactions. They see a 3.5% increase in media efficiency ratio, MER, and they see a 5% decrease in customer acquisition costs. So this is the data from $4 billion in spend, $26 billion in revenue. Revenue's going up, MER is going up, new customers are going up, CACs are going down. You're acquiring more customers, doing more revenue, more efficiently, post using Northbeam. So that's data in aggregate. Take it for what it's worth, but we've been using Northbeam the entire time, and I'm about to have my best year ever. Directionally, thank you, Northbeam, for everything you do. Appreciate you. Thank you for sponsoring the podcast. If you want to spend more money and do it more efficiently, hit up Northbeam. Tell them I sent you. Thank you so much.
So, Krishna, one thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is data scientists, right? Because you mentioned that a couple times. And the problem that I had and we had is like, we don't know what we don't know. And we almost don't know what we should know, right? And that's, I think, where data scientists come in. Most companies can't afford a full-time data scientist. Hexet is probably at the stage where we could invest in that. The start was really setting up our infrastructure with Saras, right? But like, I think this is a big problem for people is they kind of feel like and smell like they should be doing this, but they don't know exactly like really what they need. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So the way I look at that, Jason, is if we identify that one objective, for example, we were working with a clothing retailer recently, and their forecast accuracy was 85% the year before. And what that meant was they're sitting on 10 million in inventory that they couldn't move, and that their EBITDA took a massive hit, right? So the problem statement there was, guys, I need to forecast better, right? Close to 99%, 98% accuracy, so that the amount of inventory and the capital expense that I'm going to make on buying that inventory is proportional to how much my marketing and other efforts can move this inventory, right? We got in a data scientist to solve that forecasting problem. We got the accuracy really, really high up, and their EBITDA went from mid-single digits to double digits, right? They had significantly more cash left in the bank, and that is a specific problem for which we had to bring in a data scientist to help solve for. A similar example that I can think of is forecasting sales, right? If you're spending money in marketing across various different channels, and if you want to see how much revenue am I going to make if I vary these spends across these different channels, that's a data science problem, right? So once we know that this is the problem statement that we are looking to solve or find an improvement in, on the back end, it's possible that maybe it could be an out-of-the-box solution, or maybe we have to bring in a data engineer, an analyst, and a data scientist together to solve for it. But usually that's how I look at it, is start with the problem. And if that problem statement requires somebody with statistics or a machine learning background, then we can put them on it for a couple of months. They can get something out.
Yeah, one other thing I would add here is that what you're really trying to do with numbers is understand relationships. And we talked about the causal thing. And what you find is that a lot of times, like, numbers are connected to each other. So a really good example of this that we've discussed before is people will say, well, what's a good conversion rate for your website? And it's like, well, the answer is always, it depends. It depends on your goals. It depends on the AOV, and it depends on, what you want to do in terms of retention, whether you're trying to get people to subscribe. There's all these kind of things going on. So one of the things that makes numbers hard is that it's really difficult to take a number and say, this is the standard, because it's contextual to your business and a whole bunch of other numbers. So one of the things that you're trying to do is understand how different numbers interrelate within your business. If I take my margins up 5 points, what does that do to my cost per acquisition? What does that do to my conversion rate? What does that do to my average order value? And so understanding and peeling out causality starts, I think, with understanding the way these numbers kind of have ropes that are tied to each other. And if one moves up, the other moves down, and they kind of pull on each other. And I'm constantly trying to figure out like, what is it that I do, trying to verbalize what is it that I do that's effective. And I think one of the things I do is I run lots and lots and lots of little experiments where I'm trying to understand relationships.
Yep.
So and there's really no shortcut to that. That in every business, I think like really, I'll go back to the Trevi example because this is what I've been doing a lot of right now. It is, and I think the subscription thing, Krishna, is a great example. So like the way that you price things and the way that you set up value propositions relative to each other, for example, and the way that you take margins dramatically impacts obviously the way that people will pick products. We went in a 24-hour period from like, okay, our average order value was like $19 or something. And we had one set of pricing. And then 24 hours later, our average order value is like $18.75. But we went from a 1% subscription rate to a 15% subscription rate. And it was all about the way that we position things relative to each other. And I think my message to anybody listening to this is that number one, your business, the numbers for your business, that I think there's some helpful things out there as, you know, to understand general industry standards and other people, but you're running your own race, and that there's really no shortcut for putting in the work of doing a lot of little experimenting. But the experimenting isn't helpful if you don't have the ability to see what it's doing and how it's impacting your numbers. And that's where this gets really powerful. When I have the ability to see all the numbers, the thing that makes e-com so unique and singular, in my opinion, especially compared to like, say, selling into Target or Walmart, is the rapidness of the feedback loops. Hey, what would happen if pricing went down $2 on this item? I can find out in an hour sometimes, right? I can drop the price, and then I can watch how did these 10 metrics move immediately for the next 1,000 sessions when that price dropped. And that is a superpower if you learn to leverage it, because the tighter these feedback loops and the more quickly you get data, the quicker you can learn. If you're going to be a really effective operator in the digital space, you have to be somebody who's learning how to leverage data to really quickly experiment and get better very rapidly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, Jason, it's a great question. It's like it's great question, great line of thought. Because like to me, it all comes down to quality of questions. Quality of questions that informs quality of experiments. Right. To which, what is Mike speaking about?
I have one question for you guys. At what stage do you think, or what is the kind of resource that you would hire if you're building a data team, if you're, I don't know, a smaller brand? We spoke about when to start buying data products, but Mike, to your point, if I'm a data savvy operator, I'm comfortable with dashboards and spreadsheets, etc., then I can get the numbers, do the massaging, do the analysis myself. But if I'm somebody who's more intuitive, product oriented, so on and so forth, not necessarily so comfortable with numbers, I prefer a narrative summary. Maybe an analyst, having an analyst on the team could be a better investment so that they can save their time to do things that they're good at, offload the number crunching to an analyst. How do you guys think about it? And when do you think is a good time to have an analyst on the team?
So my one take here, and this might be an out of touch take, but my take on just about anything is that first you should do it. And the reason why you should do it first is it's really difficult to even understand what you want or what you need until you've tried to do it yourself. So my first thing I would say is like, I think it's a cop out to say I'm not a numbers guy. I'm an ideas guy. And I think even if you're a bad numbers guy, I think forcing yourself to do the work and to learn some means that you're going to end up making a much better hire when you do hire a numbers guy. Like definitely talent levels and aptitudes vary wildly in this space. But I would encourage everybody, like, having a competence level of 0 is just unacceptable, and it's a cop out, and I wouldn't do it, because if you don't ever develop competence, and this is true not just here, but in marketing and a bunch of other areas, if you don't develop the competence, then you don't know how to spot talent. You don't know how to keep people accountable. You don't know how to challenge people, adequately. So I always try and do it first, at least to understand what my needs are, Krishna. Like if I don't understand my needs, then I can't begin to kind of answer that. And I think for different businesses, the needs are different. There are some businesses where it's like, man, an analyst might be the third hire I need to make. And then there's other businesses where it's like, I don't need one until we get to 20 or whatever. And that's kind of the point of this episode really, is how contextual data is. But I do think the other thing I think is that in most businesses, when you're small, that people wear multiple hats. So I think having somebody that's at least spending a portion of their time thinking about the data and keeping important numbers in front of people, that's something that should be happening fairly early on. I think it's kind of a
we did it
founder
around 10.
activity. Yeah.
I think around 10 million. And I think Mike, for us, I think it was like 10 or 12 million, maybe 12. It was somewhere in there, on the way to 15. But our thinking there was our SKU complexity is really high. And it's constantly like, we have a business where like we're always inflating the number of SKUs. Like there's just new phones showing up all the time.
Which is a huge place for inefficiency and bad things.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And until we had like owned manufacturing, like imagine what balance sheet problems you can create with that kind of SKU collection, complexity. So we did it early because we had the category we were in was inherently complicated, even though it looks simple. Like, oh, it's a phone case. No, there's like a lot of under the surface complexity. So to me, Krishna, it comes down to like, how rapidly is the complexity in the business going to, does growth bring additional complexity, right? Like if you're a single SKU brand in a single market, in a single channel, you can go a long time without having an analyst. But the minute you start increasing complexity, like your data problems also, like they're linear with complexity. So like, I think that's probably the big thing for people to think about. I think like we see this in the D2C space a lot. We see operators really rush to expand markets or expand channels. And I think it's a mistake because they do not have the systems to do that well and profitably. And they probably wind up doing a lot of inefficient things for the sake of like vanity metrics. So to me, it's like understanding all these dimensions that affect complexity is probably the biggest driver for any of this shit. Like hiring an analyst, buying data tools, like all this is just a downstream of how complex are you making your business.
I think one other kind of final end cap I'd make here is that it's interesting as I'm paying attention to what's going on in the AI space. It's becoming more and more, we've talked about data as the new oil. And I think that there was a while where I was kind of like, oh, we kind of jumped the shark. We're kind of overestimating the importance of data. And now I think with these learning models and AI, I think we're back to like, no, if having data and having access to data is a direct line to outperformance.
So Mike, the way I'm thinking about it is yes. So far what has happened was, let's say you have a single source of truth, which has everything in there, right? It ultimately depended on the individual brilliance or individual skill set of the person who is consuming the data in the dashboards to make sense of it and then leverage it, right? With AI, that's going to flip.
Yeah.
That's going to flip. Agents are going to do a lot of this thinking, or agents can be built to do a lot of these thinking. We are maybe a couple of years away from getting there. But if you don't have all of your information in one place, then the agent that's looking at marketing has no understanding of COGS or inventory. The answers that you're going to get are going to be suboptimal as well, right?
There's two things here that we didn't really hit on that we've got to hit on. The first is having a single point of truth is critical. And one of the ways that businesses will fail, or not fail, but just like they'll destroy value, is really counterintuitive. You wouldn't guess that it happens. And it's two key leaders looking at a number that they think they're both looking at the same number and they're looking at different numbers. We had a situation like this where our CFO is like, our margins on the website are 20%. And with our marketing costs, like net of marketing costs, our margins are at 8%. And that is not, I'm throwing out numbers, and that's not good enough. And the person running the website thought our margins net of marketing were at 20%. And that 12% difference is a big freaking difference, it turns out. And you'll see this all the time where if people don't have a single point of truth, then they're making decisions that make sense in the context of what they think's true about the world. But what's practically happening is they are pulling in different directions than other leaders in your same business just because they're not looking at the same numbers.
Yep. Well said, Matt.
All right, boys.
I think that's the pod.
I think we are timed out.
Well, you made it to the end. You are now a true friend of the operators. Some other friends of the operators: Northbeam, Fulfill, Postscript, Saras, Richpanel. 5 softwares, 5 sponsors, 5 softwares I actually use and pay for, and I was using and pay for before they started paying us for the podcast. Thank you for sponsoring the podcast, all 5 of you guys. Thank you for making it to the end. Thanks for being here. Talk to you later.